Hello, my name is Maria Bezubova and you're at my channel Fertilizers Jazz. Here we talk about events, trends, technologies in the world of fertilizers and agriculture. The channel is already 1 year old and I am very happy to spend this year with you, sharing experience and insights of myself and cool guests that come for the interviews. By now we are 410 here, people who support the channel with subscription, and I'm very grateful to all of you. But when I look at the statistics of the channel, I see that more than 50% of viewers are not subscribed yet. Please subscribe, because it helps the channel to grow. The more subscriptions and likes the channel has, the more YouTube helps to promote it and bring new people to our community. So please subscribe, put like to this video, and let's jazz. Today is June 16 and this is a weekly markets update. Let's have a look at the news of week 24 and see what are the next trends. What a week it was! We expected Indian tender outcome as the largest news of the week, but there were other events, tectonic moves in geopolitics that put all commodities markets on fire. Israel-Iran conflict that shaped into a much more serious confrontation than any time before was a trigger to price increase across markets. Despite Iranian fertilizers production facilities were not damaged during Friday and weekend attacks, fertilizers market responded to the events with immediate price surge, and the dominoes began falling. The uncertainty is ruling the market now. Let's start with the Indian tender outcome. There were 22 companies which offered to the tender. Total volume offered was almost 2.5 million tons. L1 price turned out to be exactly as we discussed, $399, which is $14 higher versus last tender. The tender offers were opened on Thursday, and then early Friday, Israel has launched attack at Iran, and market turned upside down. If we look on tender offers from the position of Thursday, I would assume that Indians would be able to push for at least 500,000 tons or even more, with several suppliers countering L1 price. However, as of Friday, it is not the case anymore. July future price for Arab Gulf FOB skyrocketed to $430 and higher. Similar level was reached for July futures for Brazil CFR. On the physical side, SABIC sold a cargo of 40 to 45,000 tons at $402 FOB. Algerian producers sold at $417 FOB. So, taking into account incredible level of uncertainty in the market that will last for some time for sure, I would guess that Indian government will try to buy as much as possible, even not at L1 price, because retender will end up with much higher price. Israeli military operation against Iran is not over, as per the news from Israeli government. So, what can be the implications of this escalation for fertilizers industry? Let's not go into apocalyptic scenarios, but still try to foresee key outcomes, at least the immediate ones. First, supply from Iran itself might be disrupted. For now, seems like fertilizers production facilities were not significantly damaged yet, but we don't know what can happen next. We already know that gas production facilities were damaged. Let's see how it will influence fertilizers production. Also, we know that Bandar Abbas port facilities were definitely damaged, so export operations will be disrupted with high probability. Brazil, where the active purchase season will start in a month or so, and which accepts Iranian products, might be hit the most. In previous years, more than 400,000 tons of urea arrived from Oman, Iran, to Brazil during Q3. Secondly, Egyptian fertilizers production will be affected, as gas supply from Israel was already disrupted. Egypt was thoroughly preparing for this summer with additional significant amounts of LNG cargoes booked, as well as additional regasification facilities that are supposed to be set up in June-July. However, all this was planned on top of usual gas supply from Israel, not instead of it. Egyptian fertilizers production stoppages already started on Friday. It is now difficult to assess the magnitude of this effect because I don't think anyone can foresee now for how long gas supply will be disrupted. But for sure it will tighten at least July supply-demand balance for 1 or even several 100,000 tons potentially. Third is more apocalyptic scenario, which I personally don't believe, but still it is an option that circulates in discussions now. What if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz? I wouldn't even try to calculate the effect, and I hope it won't happen, of course, because this would be a massive disruption for the whole globe, and fertilizers is least of the problem in this case. But just from the analytical point of view, I will mention that during past years, average Q3 urea export volume coming out of Arab Gulf, including Iran, was more than 4 million tons, plus about 1 million tons of ammonia, plus more than 2.2 million tons of sulfur. So, indeed apocalyptic scenario. But even without that, the effect of what already is happening will hit the market hard. On top of Israel-Iran escalation, one more Russian fertilizer producer, Diminished, was hit by Ukrainian drone attack at the end of last week, and it will be also out of operation for some time, perhaps. The actual effect of the attack is not reported. However, we might assume that it will take a couple of weeks, at least, to get both Nevinomysk and Novorossiysk plants back on stream. So, Q3 this year will be as much unpredictable as it never was, perhaps. In the similar situation, we were only in 2022, when Russian invasion to Ukraine was rolling and uncertainty level was going off the scale. Paper values went crazy for July and August. Egypt FOB future price gained $8 for July and $13 for August, which was incomparable to gains of other benchmarks. Arab Gulf FOB future price corrected by almost $40 for both months ahead. Similar correction happened for Brazil CFR future price. NOLA values increased $13 for July and $15 for August. I'm sure we will see more rally this week. Now, let's move to other market segments and see what were used in the market before it went on fire. Ammonium sulfate market was subdued again last week. Chinese AMSUL values held at the similar or a bit higher level of $150 to $55 FOB for crystal product and increased slightly for granular to $165 to $70 FOB. Demand across key markets is minimal. There were several small tenders announced in Southeast Asian markets, specifically in Thailand, Malaysia. India also issued a tender for 25,000 to 30,000 tons of standard product to be supplied before end of July. One more tender was announced for supply to Central America, a significant one, seeking for 22,000 tons of standard product and 11,000 tons of granular. All tenders closed end of last week or early this week. Demand in Brazil remains slow, but prices nominally went up. Recent tender results will show direction to the market. However, there will be not much demand in upcoming month, at least. The nitrates market continues to ride on the back of growing urea price. The top talking points in the industry have been price increases amid low demand and the attack on Russian ammonia and nitrates producer Novomoskovsk, and then Nevinomysk later during the week. Demand for AN in Europe now is limited, and purchases are only for storage for use next spring, while CAN is still being bought for application in grasslands. There is ample supply of Russian material, but prices are firming ahead of the rise in import duties. However, early rounds of price increases stimulated significant demand from all European producers. Now, producers are waiting and assessing possibilities for further increases. Production at Russian Novomoskovsk Azot has been severely impacted by a drone attack, and same happened with Nevinomysk Azot. The extent of damage is not known exactly, but production is down for at least a few weeks. While it is still early to assess the actual impact, it is expected that Baltic and European nitrate prices could firm more as a result of the lack of supply from the plants. Other than that, on production side, Neohim's ammonium nitrate and nitric acid plant and Yara's Lihaver plant continue to be under maintenance. Also, it is understood Yara plant in Brunsbüttel in Germany is also down. Ammonia market was mostly quiet last week, with little business done both west and east of Suez, and prices remaining unchanged. Business east of Suez was muted due to Eid holidays. Indian demand is just expected to emerge, while last week there were no spot activity. In Algeria, there were no fresh deals conducted as well, but producer is rumored to target now $410 FOB, higher than a week ago. In the US, there were no significant news. Supply from Gulf Coast ammonia plant is eagerly awaited, but there are no actual indications when it will launch production. In the phosphate market, the news are the same as many weeks in a row. Prices continue increasing without signs of stopping. Indian demand remained robust. Price indicated around $765 CFR for June-July shipment, although no new deals were concluded. And level proposed in the recent tenders is already at least $10 higher than that. Herald tender that was closed last week received offers for two cargoes of 50,000 tons of DAP each to the west and east coasts. The lowest offer was from Hexagon at $775 CFR for 30,000 tons of unspecified origin. Indagro also offered $780 CFR, most likely for Jordanian product, but this is both unconfirmed. At the same time, in RCF tender that closed on Thursday, Indagro is understood to propose this same lot. However, no offers for NPS were submitted, so the tender will be scrapped. Result of NFL tender for 50,000 tons is still unknown. Europe was purchasing mostly OCP product last week at price levels similar to a week ago. In the US, significant activity was registered, despite the seasonal window for phosphates is closed. DAP barges traded between $715 to $20 per short ton, FOB for June-August loading, and MAP traded at $750 to $57 per short ton, FOB for July-September. Despite this firmer sentiment, purchases from warehouses remain very slow, as farmers are pushing back due to extremely low affordability. Imports to the US dipped by 20% in January-April versus a year ago, and that's exactly the reason. In Brazil, there was no fresh activity registered last week. Demand situation is similar to the US. Brazilian farmers are reluctant to accept these insanely high levels, while affordability is even worsening. Argentina was buying last week, though. There was a sales from Baltic of 30,000 tons of MAP at the level $730 FOB Baltic. OCP also reported sales of 30,000 tons vessel for July loading, most likely to Argentina, at $790 to $95 CFR. In China, DAP offers climbed to $730 to $40 FOB, but there were no deals done at this level yet. But of course, prices will increase on the back of bullish international sentiment. Many Chinese producers are committed until July and some even until September. Not many export quotas left. So again, no hope for price trend reversal anytime soon. Moving to the fundamentals. Of course, gas market was the one that showed an acute reaction at the conflict in the Middle East. European natural gas futures rose nearly 5%, close to 38 euros per megawatt hour on Friday, the highest level since early April, tracking a broader surge in energy markets. In addition to geopolitical risks, other factors are contributing to upward pressure on prices. Wind power generation is expected to decline in northwestern Europe, reducing the supply of renewable energy. In France, concerns are mounting over a potential reduction in nuclear output after the national regulator reported early signs of possible stress corrosion in a reactor. Meanwhile, unseasonably hot weather across much of Europe is driving up electricity demand for air conditioning. US natural gas futures show just a very limited increase compared to the sharp moves seen in oil and other gas benchmarks. Meanwhile, US natural gas fundamentals remain relatively stable. Storage levels have improved, and according to the Energy Information Administration, the week ending June 6 saw another triple-digit storage build. Inventories remain more than 5% above the 5-year seasonal average. Still, the rapid growth in LNG exports is raising concerns about tightening supply and upward pressure on prices later this year. In addition, forecasts call for hotter than normal temperatures across much of the US, which could boost demand for cooling. Agricultural commodities future prices continued upward correction last week. Wheat futures rallied 3% to above $5.4 per bushel on Friday, bouncing back from a 4-week low amid bargain buying and improved sentiment across the grain complex. The recovery was supported by strength in soybeans and corn, which surged following the Trump administration proposed biofuel blending mandate. Traders viewed wheat's recent dip as a buying opportunity, particularly with global supply concerns lingering. Additional momentum came from a sharp rise in crude oil prices after Israel attacked Iran. Meanwhile, USDA, in its June WSD report issued last week, slightly raised its 25-26 US wheat supply outlook, projecting total production at 1.92 billion bushels. Corn futures also increased to around $4.4 per bushel as US supply concerns and firm demand dynamics outweigh ample global harvest prospects. The fresh June USDA's report trimmed 24-25 year-ending stocks by 1.3 million tons, underscoring tighter domestic balance sheets, while weekly export inspections have consistently exceeded forecasts, signaling strong overseas appetite. Meanwhile, continued dryness across the US Midwest, where just 66% of the crop was rated good to excellent, has raised fresh yield risks as the critical pollination window approaches. Ethanol crack spreads, supported by healthy refinery margins, are also propping up corn's biofuel demand. Offsetting these drivers, Brazil's safrinha was raised to a record 101 million tons, and Romania plus Ukraine forecasts for 25 have jumped over 70% year-on-year, capping any runaway rally. Soybean futures climbed to almost $10.7 per bushel on Friday after the Trump administration proposed biofuel blending requirements that surpassed market expectations. The rally followed the Environmental Protection Agency's plan to increase the volume of biofuels that refineries must blend into the nation's fuel supply over the next 2 years. Soybean oil, a key biodiesel feedstock, surged on the news. Analysts said the move would significantly boost domestic soybean crush demand in 26 and 27. The proposal was seen as a major victory for the biofuels industry, which had been actively lobbying for such changes. Adding to the bullish sentiment, soybean prices were further supported by a sharp rise in crude oil prices, of course. Moving to the shipping industry. Containerized freight index hovered at the level same to previous week. Freight to and from all destinations remained almost unchanged. The only news from last week was bad, unfortunately. On June 9, the Singapore-flagged container vessel Wanhai 503 suffered a catastrophic explosion and fire close to the Indian coast. The ship carried 22 crew members, 18 were rescued, but 4 remain missing. The vessel was loaded with 157 containers of hazardous materials, including flammable and toxic chemicals. Several containers have fallen overboard, raising environmental concerns. The Indian government is preparing for possible pollution control measures. It is the largest accident of recent years with a container vessel. The Baltic Exchange Dry Index surged by more than 20% over last week. The Capesize market displayed a steady performance last week in both basins, starting on a subdued note due to European holidays, but gaining traction as the week progressed. The Panamax market encountered significant rises this week. A strong demand push in the Atlantic was for the most part grain-centric, with decent levels of support found in both the North and South Americas. Demand ex-Australia appeared the main driver for the Pacific and with an improving East Coast South American market. In ultra-supermax segment, there was a definite split between the two basins. The Atlantic overall showed solid performance with stronger numbers being discussed from both the US Gulf and South America. However, this positivity was not seen from Asia. A limited fresh inquiry failed to slow the growing number of prompt vessels. In Handysize segment, the market showed mixed performance, with modest movements across both basins. To sum up, geopolitical turbulence broke into commodities markets and turned things upside down. Too many scenarios are on the table, and main outcome is incredible uncertainty level that makes any forecasts insolvent now. Urea Indian tender result is also on the string at the moment, as it is unclear how much volume apart from 79,000 tons proposed at L1 price of $399 CFR will be available for the Indian government. If Indians need to retender, looks like price will be at least $40 higher. Brazilian importers will be hit the most by Iranian urea export disruption as main import season approaches and level of market uncertainty mountains. Supply from Egypt in June-July is also under question, as gas supply from Israel was already diminished, and larger volumes of LNG booked will not be able to substitute it. So, looks like it was an extremely timely decision for Chinese to come back to the urea export market. If China is able to accelerate exports, it might help the global market tremendously and still give Chinese producers opportunity to sell at FOB level even higher versus their initial target. Nitrates prices continued to increase, but buyers were hesitating to accept these levels for purchase to stock. However, now with two Russian plants being out of the market for some time due to drone attacks, and of course, general market situation might stimulate forward purchase of European buyers. Ammonium sulfate price increased slightly last week, but it will definitely climb more on the back of urea rally in coming weeks. Phosphate prices continued putting records, supported by robust demand in India. At the same time, Brazilian buyers are more and more reluctant to accept higher price levels, as well as US buyers. But taking into account general situation in the markets, there is no chance of price drop anytime soon. Gas price in Europe surged as a response to the escalation in the Middle East, while US price remained almost unchanged as fundamentals were healthy. Agricultural commodities future prices all corrected upwards as a result of certain supply and ending stocks tightening in the recent June USDA report, as well as long-awaited decision of Trump's administration to increase the amount of biofuels that refineries need to blend into the fuels in upcoming 2 years. Container shipping prices hovered at the levels similar to last week. Bulk shipping activity was very positive, with significant improvements in Capesize and Panamax segments. So, let's see what is next around the corner, but it will be already next week. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, put like to this video, push the bell in order not to miss any updates, and see you soon.